Hello, and welcome back to Radical Engagements. And we continue reading John Michael Greer's Bracing for Impact. In the last section, Greer discussed the conflicts in Ukraine and Israel and Palestine, hinting at the conflicts in Armenia, Rojava, all over Africa, etc. I also picked up the normal, we're going to run out of money, everything's bankrupt because our currency is not the reserve currency anymore, a combination of neoclassical economics with a little bit of Michael Hudson thrown in. And I commented on the fact that a lot of this doomerism has been not entirely wrong, but not right on scale and timing at all. And not right that anyone clearly is going to replace it either, although Greer hasn't said that. So we pick up in the middle of the article, actually the end of the first half. Anyway, this is Greer speaking. As this is happening, furthermore, just when our old friend Peak Oil is rearing his head again. Varn commentary here. Greer has been talking about peak oil for 20 years. And he is not wrong about its outline, but again, maybe has been way too optimistic about the apocalyptic consequence of its immediacy. Back to the text. This was always inevitable. The downside of running a civilization on a finite, non-renewable resource is that no matter how much money you throw into finding and developing new sources, no matter how eagerly you exploit low-grade reserves like oil shales and tar sands, that doesn't solve your problem. It just kicks the can a little bit further down the road. Depletion never sleeps, and so every barrel of liquid fuel you burn today is a barrel you do not have tomorrow. Combine that with the steadily rising fossil fuel consumption in a world where nearly all transport still relies on fossil fuel, and you have a recipe for a real mess. As we have already learned the hard way, we can't rely on wind power, solar power, nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, or any other of the standard nostrums to bail us out. Varn commentary: nuclear power is probably going to be a lot stronger than you think, but even that has real limits, and that real limits is the amount of fissile material available and where to store it. Although the fissile material part's actually way more apparently of a problem than storage. Back up to Greer's text. We've been building the first two. We've been building the first two dramatically for decades, and fossil fuel consumption keeps on going in lockstep. Well, that's because economic growth keeps going in lockstep. John Michael Greer. Anyway, that's not just because of wind and solar are too intermittent to provide more than trickle power to the grid most of the time, though that's true. It's also because of vast amounts of fossil fuel energy to build, install, and maintain wind and power. Maintain wind and power installations. I think he means solar power installations. As for nuclear fission, it never pays for itself. That's why utility companies walked away from it. Well, why doesn't it pay for itself? And fusion costs so much more than fission that even if a commercial fusion reactor can be made to work, it'll be hopelessly unaffordable. This is Varn talking. I don't know why you say that nuclear fission never pays for itself when Europe uses it relatively well, and they have not walked away from it at all. So, and the reason why Germany has walked away from it has nothing to do with cost. Back to the text. All these possibilities were discussed and exploited at length half a century ago, and all the gimmicks being hawked on the internet today by people who think they're being original were being hawked on less transient media back then. They were tested, and most of them were found wanting. Technology doesn't work like a single test, bro, even with fossil fuels. Greer, that's not a very good reading of science. The first hard lesson to take in is that we can't deal with the end of the age of oil by increasing production of some other energy resource. The alternative resources won't cut it, and the other fossil fuels are already being used as fast as they can be mined or pumped from the ground. The second hard lesson is that there is no way to make the standard lifestyles of the age of extravagance sustainable on a post-petroleum future. Those lifestyles, with their gluttonous appetite for energy and their reliance on petroleum-based minerals like plastic, were born of the age of oil and would die with it. That doesn't mean that we're inevitably headed back to some kind of premodal squalor modern mythology likes to project into the past. It's possible to support a literate, urban, humane society on a tiny fraction of the energy and resource consumption modern industrial societies consider necessary. I would actually agree with that. The proof is that this has been done many times. And what's more, many discoveries and inventions of the last few centuries could be put to work to make the future society with a modest energy consumption more comfortable and viable. Considering how much has been learned about the physics of energy, for example, and how that could be combined with architecture to make buildings that are comfortable 365 days a year with little or no heat input. This can be done. I've studied how to do it in a master conserver classes in the mid 1980s. In the year 1800, the region where I now live was full of thriving communities with their own libraries, newspapers, democratic governments, trade, and information links to the rest of the world without any dependence on fossil fuels. In the year 2100, the same thing could be true with improved sanitation, super insulated homes, shortwave radio, ultralight aircraft, among other things, making even them more comfortable and interesting than they were in the federal era. That's a future worth having and a future we can still achieve. Is this a global population too high for that? The question has not yet been settled. Meanwhile, every continent but Africa has already gone into a population contraction, and Africa is following the same trajectory, just a little bit more slowly. And unfortunately, climate change is going to heat that up. That's foreign talking. By by 2100, if current trends continue, there'll be fewer people on the planet than there were in 2000, and the downslope is expected to continue from there. One difficulty with this pleasant picture, of course, is getting there. We've already thrown away too many chances to make this transition. Warren talking. While I am somewhat skeptical about the amount of pessimism he has about some of these alternative fuel sources, I actually think in the main he's still right. We have to rethink the way we do an economy. We could have a humane economy with a lot of advanced technologies, which shifting away from the kinds of power consumption that we do if we actively tried to do it. We haven't tried. We don't seem to be that interested in trying. When the first oil crisis hit 50 years ago in 1973, the industrial world still had huge reserves of fossil fuel and used them at a much more modest rate than today. That's absolutely true. A transition to this kind of future I just outlined could have been launched then at an equally modest cost. That didn't happen, and instead, several decades of frailing, not to mention high oil prices, the US and its allies doubled down on fossil fuels, relying on the North Sea and Alaska oil fields to bail them out. And by the time the second oil crisis hit in 2005, the North Sea and the North Slope fields have already been pumped nearly dry. So we went through several years of frailing, not to mention another round of high oil prices before frantic efforts to extract liquid fuels from shale oils brought supply more or less back in the balance with demand at prices that have been considered disastrously high just a few years before. Even then, American shale oil reserves could only have been used sparingly to keep the price of oil below ruinous levels, while other measures were put into place to deal with the end of the age of oil. And of course, that's not what happened. Instead, shale oil reserves got drained. As fast as possible for short term gains. Now, North American shale provinces have been tapped out, and the one left standing, the Permian Shale in Texas, is losing ground fast. So, once again, we can look forward to several years of flailing before another temporary substitute gets jammed into place. And this time, the U.S. won't be able to draw on the oceans of cheap credit that made fracking financially possible. No doubt some give me or other will be found, but it won't be as easy or cheap. I completely agree with that. I don't think Greer's wrong about that at all. So here's a good reason to think that over the next few years, we'll be facing a steep lurch towards a downward along the ragged trajectory I've named the long descent. So wait, go check his book out by that name. I don't agree with all of it, but it's worth reading. It's not the end of the world, though doubtless we may see a flurry of gloating predictions of imminent doom from the various apocalypse lotties. To be fair, as much as I've called Greer a doomer, he's actually not an apocalypticist. Although sometimes he seems to talk that way because he seems to think catastrophe is gonna happen very quickly. I don't think that. I think catastrophe is slow burning, and we've been living through a catastrophe since 1971. But that's me. I don't even think Greer would necessarily disagree with that. And in the long array of things, maybe that isn't that long. But nonetheless. What this means is that there are high probability that months or years will come to see very hard times for a great many people across the industrial world, especially in the United States and its allies. I think especially everywhere, bro. I don't think it's going to be easier for China or India either in these future transition years. Sure as hell isn't being easy for Russia, even though they are succeeding in their immediate task. Back to the thing. Thus, it's a time to circle back and revise some of the themes I've discussed between 2006 and 2009 during the early days of my blogging career and talk about how to deal with the twilight of the age of oil. No, everybody loves coming back to a classic theme. This is when I started reading him, by the way. Let's start with a point that should be obvious, but apparently isn't. No, I'm not saying you should move to the country by yourself or with a group of friends and settle into a lifestyle bucolic brust as a subsistence farmer. To begin with, farming is a skilled trade. If you didn't grow up doing it or haven't spent years working on farms learning how it's done, you don't know enough to keep yourself from going broke or starving to death. It takes 5 to 10 years of hard work for the average to get past the learning curve and reach a point where they can feed themselves by farming. Yep, it does. Farming's hard. I have a friend who's a farmer, as you guys know, if you watch the show. Back to the thing. Since we're not talking about the end of the world, furthermore, you can't expect to have to keep paying a mortgage, utility bills, and taxes while you find yourself into a brutally hard physical labor from sunup to sundown. Americans have this weird cultural fixation about going back to the land, and the dominant role of the American culture worldwide over the last century or so has been inspired a lot of people in other parts of the world to fall into the same mental trap. Here in the U.S., for certain broad class of well-off urbanites, moving to a rural area and spending a few years playing at farming is an improved way to have a midlife crisis and finish the task of working on an unstable marriage. I've watched this happen tolerably often. It's not a viable way to deal with an impending economic and social crisis. Again, not unless you grew up farming or have some other access to extensive hands-on experience. Even though I know people who are specializing in farming and gardening, it's a hard living, as we've talked about before on the show. So what approach do I recommend to my readers who are watching industrial civilization lurch and shudder under the weight of its own idiotic choices and want to protect themselves and the people they care about from the consequences? I've talked about this quite a deal in the past, but it was a long time ago and it bears some repeating at intervals. The principal rule can be summed up in a single sentence: collapse now and avoid the rush. Let's unpack a bit. At the end of the period of crisis that seems to be approaching, if you and the people you care about make it through, you'll be getting by with less energy, fewer products of energy than you use today. Electricity, heating fuel, and transport fuels will be much more expensive than they are now, and food will likely cost much more too. Varn already does, especially if it's the kind of packaged processed food that so many in the industrial world rely on. It's not good for you, although I eat a lot of it, although I'm trying less to. This is Varn talking, by the way. If the impending real estate crash goes far enough, you may be able to spend some of the difference of your decade in housing cost, but I wouldn't recommend counting on that. Those of my readers who have been poor, as I have, asterisk, as I have too, on asterisk, know that it takes a fair amount of skill to live comfortably on scant income. It does, and it's easy to forget, and it changes all the time. This is Martin talking. Like, I lived on, God, I remember in the 90s, I was buying groceries for 2 people off of $20 for a week. I can barely buy a meal for that now. And part of that's the change in prices, and part of that's just like a difference in standard of living. Although the kind of crap we ate for $20 a week is the kind of crap that you would not want to avoid doing. And also, subsistence gardening as a supplement to your income is kind of a passion hobby, and you can grow cool things. I like eating real tomatoes as opposed to red globes of sadness, but it's expensive. Don't know what else to tell you. If the more practice you have, the more time you have to explore the options for it count, the easier it will for you to get by. Answer Steric. I adjust really well to low circumstances because I lived in the developing world for 10 years. And while I had a lot of access and privilege, not denying that at all, there's just certain things you can't get and you get used to not having them. I'm just going to tell you. There's also certain things you can get and you miss. I miss going to the grocery store every day and getting fresh vegetables that were actually fresh, for example, for not a lot of money. You just go, and that was true in 2 out of the 3 countries I lived in. That was easy to do. Since crunch time hasn't hit yet, and since the chance to get some of that practice in and some of the explorations out of the way now, while you still count your current income and research base to fall back on if you need to, that's what collapsing now and ahead of the rush gives you freedom to do. Varn, this is kind of the prepper doomer version of prefigurative politics. And I actually have struggled with prefigurative politics. One of the things I find interesting about Greer is he doesn't truly imagine a politics as possible to resolve this problem. And while I love eco-socialists and stuff, and have them on the show all the time, one of the things that I've realized is they don't really have good answers for it either. Because they're dependent on things like anything from the Green New Deal to like worldwide global degrowth programs. Um, so there's a kind of double think where I think you kind of have to combine these two mentalities and do what's good for you and also do what's good politically. But it's hard to do both things. I mean, it's an ask and it costs time in both directions, and you have to make that adjudication for yourself. Imagine for a moment that your income were to drop sharply. Asterisk. I don't have to imagine, it's happened multiple times in my adult life. An asterisk. That was Derek talking. Or, which amounts to the same thing, runaway inflation were to make your money much worse than it is today. I think we've got a preview of what that could be. Anyway, take some time over the next few days to figure out where you would cut back, and so you could get by on less. I've already done that. Trying to give up soda for my health too, but it's also cheap. This stuff is also cheaper. Anyway, focus on ways to decrease your outgo, not to increase your income. The latter is a different project for another day. Yeah, that's all the income gain stuff is actually a lot of based on unsustainable economies anyway. This is Warren talking. Make a list of possibilities. If you were to live with other people, discuss the subject with them, and if they're willing, get them involved in drawing up a list. Asterisk. Monogamy in this economy? Question mark on asterisk. Back to Michael Greer. Then, before raw financial necessity forces you to do so, take some items you put on your list and put them into praxis. Make some changes to save money, cutting expenditures here, doing things in a cheaper way there. Pay attention to the results and discuss it with the people you live with. Then try something else. Get some experience under your belt so that when the crunch arrives, you aren't left flailing. I received a lot of thank you notes from COVID hysteria after the COVID hysteria from people who followed this advice a decade ago and were much better prepared to cope with the shutdowns and layoffs of 20 to 2022. And if I'm wrong and the crunch doesn't arrive, you have a bunch of extra money in your bank account. And what's not to like about that? There's a deeper dimension to this little experiment. As an asterisk, I know what a lot of the socialists are going to say. This is advocating personal austerity. The line between personal austerity and fucking discipline actually does need to be discussed sometimes. And I don't think a lot of socialists are willing to discuss it. And thus, personal austerity, or this is a neoliberal attitude, is a way to avoid having responsible decision making preemptively. Sorry, I'm not going to back down on that. A lot of you need to listen to this stuff. You make bad choices. I've made bad choices in the past and had to change jobs and jump countries and restart my lifestyle over and over and over again. On this is good advice. The only thing I have junk from everywhere. Most of my junk is cheap, by the way. The only exception is the books. And I probably should learn to rely on the library. What you gonna do? Back to Greer. Multinational corporations that are corrupt stooges in the government and the media might benefit from you to think of yourself in this way. Excuse me, I missed something. Take a moment to think about what the word implies. Oh, I skipped a lot. Excuse me. There are deeper dimensions to this little experiment course. The habit of spending money you picked up over the course of your life may not be helping you achieve what you want. In fact, it would be astonishing if it were. Books do. But other than that, he's probably right. If the entire structured consumer economy is set up to fool you into spending money you can't spare on things you don't need or may not even want, and so that you remain hooked into the system, trudging to work every day after day to make enough money to pay your bills. The same structure is also set up to trick you into handing over your own competences to other people. Don't do things for yourself, pay lots of money to have other people do it for you, is a siren song, a machine that keeps you in chains. I agree with that. However, there is a limited amount of expertise a person can have. As a person who's a journalist in a lot of things, I'm not necessarily going to teach myself electricity to be a professional electrician off of YouTube so that I don't ever pay for it. However, being handy and knowing people who are handy and trading skills is actually pretty useful. It's a good habit to get into. That's why the media and the political establishment love to define you as a consumer. Take a moment to think about what the word implies. Sounds like Christopher Lash. This is Varn talking. If you define yourself as a consumer, you've given away your capacities as a creator, a producer, and a maker of things and experiences. AKA, you've defined yourself as an eater and an alienated producer who is not a producer in and of themselves. Thus, you are alienated from your level and alienated from your community doubly. Thus, you are relationally alienated. Just have to throw the marks in there because Greer won't. You're pigeonholing yourself as a passive receipt of other people's productive activity. Like capitalists do. That's foreign talking, but it's true. Multinational corporations are corrupt stooges of the government and the media might benefit from you getting to think of yourself that way. Their benefit, of course, comes at your expense. The man in the suit, to borrow a line from another song, has just bought a new car from the profit he's made on your dreams. The secret of collapsing now ahead of the rush is that it makes you a creator, not a consumer. Hey, that's a good rebranding, Mr. Greer, but it's just a rebranding. You not the man in the suit get to choose how you're going to spend your money, except for insurance, taxes, and other things you have to buy. And thus, what you're going to do with your life, I think is what I was supposed to say. I'm just reading it. That's actually not my screw up. That's in the text. Sure, the man with the suit will have to postpone buying you his new car. So may you. But among the paths coming your way is a great deal of increased resilience in the face of a very troubled future. Asterisk. When I was coming up, the average people would buy a car like every 7 years. And that's obscene to me. I'm driving a car that's 20 years old. Just, for people who want to know about me, I keep it on the road as best you can. It's cheaper. It's better for the environment, even if it's an old car. Excuse me. As I die reading this John Michael Greer piece. 2 additional notes. First, back when I was writing about peak oil, I arranged to scan all the handouts I received as a student on the Master Conservative program in the mid-1980s. Yes, this was like a Master Gardener or Master Composer programs that some municipalities still offer, but it was focused on conserving energy. Some of the advice is dated, but much of it is put to good use. You can find the whole downloaded set here. Check in the show notes, find his blog, find it. It's actually pretty useful. Given the rising energy prices may be a major factor in the mess ahead, you might want to consider learning a little bit about conservation, and this is a good place to start. Second, my commentary tends to be astonishingly well-informed about odd things and unusual ways about saving money about those things. So getting some information spread a little more widely strikes me as a good thing. Therefore, I'm going to launch a new feature with my Dreamwidth account. Yes, I read his Dreamwidth account. For those of you who know what Dreamwidth is, it's a knockoff live journal. Blogging technology from almost 25 years ago. Frugal Fridays, I'd ask each reader they want to participate to consider putting one tip to save money each Friday. Just 1 tip per person per week. Data dumps are a pain in the rump for me to moderate and for other people to read. Discussion, comparing notes are also fine. See you there. I read this today because I think this Greer piece gets us thinking about some key things we have to deal with. I don't necessarily buy the way he conflates any more than I buy like people who say that decline rate of profit means that there's war coming. The decline rate of profit, if it is a real thing, and there's a reason to believe it is, and I'll talk more about that in interviews in the future. But it's not a steady thing. It's not just a clean drip down. Never has been. Does not necessitate war. If anything, the 1970s actually proved that and the fact that the conditions that made the U.S. benefit from World War II really haven't been very repeatable. So what you're gonna do, right? But I do think we do have to take some of these trends in the long term. I don't think America's going bankrupt as quickly as he says. After all, most of the IOUs are internal to the U.S. itself. It is creation of currency. What I do think is going to happen is U.S. purchasing power is going to be more limited. It isn't yet, despite the inflating price of the dollar. but it's going to become so. It's also clear that there's no like we don't have to worry about China being the replacement hegemon. There's going to be several. They're going to be at odds with each other, and the U.S. will probably be the first among equals if it's smart. Now, I'm not sure all the polities even survive the next century because these changes and the doubling down is not going to just be of the West. It's going to be everywhere. It's just going to be some of the poorer countries who've historically had to deal with this longer are actually going to have an easier time in the transition because it's not a huge of a difference in life change. And I don't think all this is necessarily going to be as cleanly. I don't think we're going to be going to a world without electricity, for example. But I do think we're going to have to stop wasting so much of it. And that means certain things, including communication technology, are going to have to change. We still have the technology to handle a lot of this. Greer's not a primitivist. I'm not a primitivist. I'm not even a clean degrowther. My way of talking about this is we should talk about all this differently. Talk about developing the world differently. Allow, deal with the uneven development. And that's going to take a lot of cooperation, or it's going to take a cooperation anyway, because people who dream of having a worldwide Hobbes figure have to deal with the fact that we're going to live in a more multipolar world. So who's going to be that Hobbes? Who knows? I don't know. But I think this gives socialists something to think about. Because one thing I want you to think about is it's not either deal with yourself or deal with politics. My guy, you got to deal with both simultaneously. You both have to change the world and clean up your room. And on that note, like and subscribe, leave a comment if you like, and we have a Patreon where there's more of this stuff. Thank you so much, and we'll have more essays coming soon.